Hey, I'm here at ASU+GSV, and I'm with Toomey from Accenture, LearnVantage, and they're doing some really interesting things, so we thought we would talk together. All right, Timothy, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Tim Toomey. I am the America's lead for LearnVantage. LearnVantage is Accenture's learning and skilling service that we've rolled out over the past 2 years. This is a really exciting and I think a really big opportunity for Accenture to start providing a lot of the training and education to our clients that they need as part of their AI reinvention journey. As we start to look at the way in which client needs are evolving, we're seeing that human skill more and more often is being paired with technological progress as being kind of the two critical components to allow a company to go through reinvention. Too often we focus on the technology front and we don't understand what the impact on the workforce is. And that's why up to about 70% of AI implementations that fail because of a lack of adoption, not because of a lack of technology. And so as we're starting to see technology continue to evolve, the tools are there for that to have the impact that people are wanting to see within their companies. But really it's the human understanding of what that technology means for them and the way in which we apply the skills to ensure that their careers continue to progress. That is the key holdup in realizing the efficiencies and the gains and all of the benefits of this technology for the company.
Right. Well, I know that in Learning Council is really more K-12 than any other market. There's a major bottleneck in terms of how they do training and professional development, in terms of it's focused mostly on pedagogy, like how you teach, and the technology is seen as just a tool.
Right.
And the average school and district has 300 tools. So it's all over the board. It's an attitude by management to empower every teacher. And when you empower everyone, you let loose the reins of all your decisions on what software you're going to use. And now you have a plethora of tools. I mean, some school districts, like we were looking at some of them in Columbus, Ohio this last year, thousands of pieces of software, like little unique ones just for special needs this and special needs that. And then, 30 different math apps, and they're just all over the board. I feel like from our national surveys, we're in a time of like, let's rip and replace or consolidate or do something like that. But I'm absolutely certain that the arguments internally are enormous, because there's this thing of let's empower everybody, which is not the same as you find in corporate America, where corporate America is like, let's run an efficient operation and everybody be in the same boat. I can understand it a little, because, you're dealing with little humans who are all different.
Sure.
And you're dealing with teachers who are all different subjects, different grades, right? So there's a little bit of push and pull going on there. But what are your thoughts on that in K-12? Because this is an enormous problem.
Sure. I mean, I think it's in a lot of ways the same problem that many of our clients face. To your point, maybe there's a little bit more urgency in a corporate environment. But the pace of change is such that most people come into a decision paralysis where they don't know what the right answer is. And so rather than try to sit back and make a decision and make a bet, they open up the door for everybody to choose everything. And so there's a lot of confusion and the lack of coordination, and we don't really understand what these tools are designed to do. And so I think at a high level, what we need to do within the K through 12 district is come up with a strategy, either at a state and local level or within different school districts, and say, this is what we think AI can do. This is what we want to use the tool for. And then within those confines, allow people to choose a tool that's best for them, but give them the direction and the understanding of what this is really designed to do in order to really unlock what the potential of this tool is. In a lot of ways, that fragmentation is not only ineffective in terms of being able to engender change, but I think it's dangerous as well. People don't understand what these tools are capable of. They don't have the right governance in order to be able to use them in a way that's not dangerous. And at the same time, there's so many other aspects of what makes AI effective that you have to set up in the back, the data infrastructure, the ability for these tools to talk together. If you just throw a bunch of different random tools at people and expect them to figure it out, it's going to end in chaos.
Yeah, and grief,
That's right.
People crying and quitting.
Of course.
Yeah, so is Accenture then in a bit in orchestration? Are you guys working on orchestration for?
I mean, that's one of the things that I think LearnVantage has the advantage of, is being part of the larger Accenture machine means that we are part of the larger workflow that any company going through a transformation is able to tap into.
Okay.
So we start off with the assessment for the client, and this is not just for talent, but for the technology. Are you prepared to go through this AI transformation?
Right.
We're able to identify those weak points, and then with our other tools, we can start to automate processes, identify where in the org chart things need to change and what kind of roles are going to be possible.
Okay.
And then where LearnVantage comes in is at the end of any kind of technology implementation. So we start with the installation, we go through the strategy, we implement all of that. The training and certification is what de-risks that technology investment and allows the client to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and for the impact of that technology to actually take place.
Okay.
So we provide that end-to-end reinvention solution.
Yeah. This is all fantastic, right? I just don't know how much, I know higher ed would be used to that sort of conversation, but I feel like K-12 is more a letting, not leading universe. It's really so focused on the outcomes and the testing requirements and moving the ball forward on those angles. They don't think as much like an enterprise, unless you're talking the really big districts and they have actual CIOs.
Sure.
Right? The vast majority of districts have a tech director, and not all of them by a long shot are actually techies.
Sure.
They've come from the science field, and that they were like guys into technology or girls into technology, and they were just raised up to figure it out, right?
Sure.
And they're not thinking with workflow. But I know that you're onto something, because when you have constricted budgets and you're losing kids left, right, and center, right? Like these, basically every major district is having to close schools right now because they're under enrolled. And they're moving in the direction of consolidate and bus further. Just probably the worst move you could make.
Of course.
Because it's the expectation of the American people right now for walkable, homeschool feel, intimate, small enough group that I can trust it. Like
right.
The locus of trust has moved down to the family level because there's so much distrust of institutions.
Right.
But they're not thinking with, how could I pull that off? I only have 28 kids in this location. How could I pull it off to keep the location, maybe rent back the rest of it somewhere else or give it back to the county? How do I do this, right? They're not thinking at that level. They're thinking the traditional model will always reign supreme. AI could do so much for that,
right?
As you know. What are your thoughts on that from a let's dig into that, the model perspective, not just the tech?
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple of things I would want to unpack out of what you just said. The first is the idea that this technology is something that should be confined to a certain specialization, or that I can only understand if I'm a technologist. I think that's a very dangerous perception. And I think one of the things that educators need to realize is that this is going to be impactful across the entire spectrum of the workforce. And so regardless if traditionally I've been a teacher or if I've been focused in an area that has nothing to do with technology at all, AI will have an impact. And getting people to understand this is not just another cloud computing solution. This is not just something that, a bunch of specialists can provide that expertise for. This is something that I need to understand at a fundamental level, because it will be a part of my daily life going forward. I think that's the first thing that needs to change.
And I think that when they hear that, they say what they always have said: it's just a tool, right? And they don't understand that it's a reorganizational factor on the order of magnitude of the difference between the retail world and Amazon.
Right.
And the difference between the taxi world and Uber.
Right.
They don't understand that what AI is truly going to bring is a restructure.
That's right.
And so they keep saying, well, it's just a tool. Well, it will be just a tool after it completely alters your entire personality and structure.
Right.
And if it doesn't do that, and you're still living in the AI traditional structure and workflow, then you're missing 99% of the potentialities of efficiency.
Right.
And the fact that once it's in place, you have the potentiality to be more human.
Right.
Because
it's
unloading so much of what used to be a lot of clerical work. I mean, that's really the thing that's overburdening teachers, is massive clerical. When you have more than 100 logins per teacher, I mean, come on. SSO is great, right? Single sign-on is great, but you still have 100 things.
Right.
I don't know how you keep yourself straight. That's just ridiculous. So anyway, what are your comments on that?
Well, I think it comes down, the question you asked is how do we convince them that this is something that's different? And I think one of the things I would want to key in on is you mentioned a lot of these school districts are just focused on the outcomes.
Yeah.
And I think in a very decentralized system where you can't have that kind of top-down leadership to say, hey, this is the direction, this is what we should be using it for, we have to focus on how we can change those desired outcomes to then model, change the behavior of the schools themselves trying to reach those outcomes. And that's where I think industry can come to play. I think that there's higher education, which is one area where as they start to change their model, which is going to be highly disrupted by this technology as well, the schools will see that because their entire job is to place students into these higher education practices or to go into industry. And so it's kind of like instead of the tail wagging the dog, industry needs to define what they're looking for from a talent perspective moving forward. What are the skills that we want our workers to have, which will feed the incentives for higher education, which will then feed the incentives for the lower school district. And so I think the more as an industry we understand what the impact of this is going to be on the workforce, the better the educators can start to train their students on the kind of skills they're going to need to be competitive in that workforce.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that's happening is they're looking at AI mostly from a consumer perspective.
Right.
They're not looking at walled garden LLMs that you bring in and are all secure and you can put anything in there and it's not like going to jeopardize your entire institution with massive lawsuits, right? So they look at it as like just a tool, just a chat bot, right? They're not looking at it they look at it from the AI literacy level, which is being pushed hard, by the feds and everybody else.
Of course.
Not fluency. So I've had this conversation with librarians. I'm like, AI is like our early visits to the library where we had to learn the card catalog. We had to learn microfiche, how to find stuff, right? We had to learn mentally map the sourcing of things. You remember that, right?
I do.
I'm like old enough to remember really early days of that.
I used to carry my card around in my wallet.
Yeah. Well, I was on the debate team in high school and college, so I spent a lot of time in the library. So mentally being able to understand that viewpoint puts you in the driver's seat from you're collecting and organizing. Now AI is doing that for you.
Right.
But if you haven't been given the viewpoint of fluency from sourcing perspective, you don't understand where things come from.
Right.
You're never going to be literate. You have to be fluent. You have to understand sourcing. So I've been telling librarians, you guys are the front lines of giving children the physicality of how things are sourced still. And you probably should always be, because once you have that experience, then when you look at AI,
right,
your mind is asking, well, where'd you get that? How's this linked to that? What was your reasoning, right?
Right.
You can't be literate without first mentally boxing out the way things should be evaluated, right? That's a data literacy. So I believe that there's this triumvirate of data literacy, AI fluency, AI.
Sure.
Literacy,
it's about teaching judgment, right? That's what we need to train our students to be able to do, and to identify when something coming out of an LLM looks right or when it doesn't look right.
Right.
That's the biggest problem, is it is a black box. And so people who don't want to learn more about it just consider it to be magic and take things at a face value, or decide that the tool is useless and stop using it.
Yeah.
And I think the sweet spot is somewhere in between, where we understand that this is a point of leverage that we can use, to your point, to free us from a lot of the daily grunt work that ties up so much of our time and doesn't allow us to be the kind of creative agents that we can be. But it's about building trust, I think, that is also guarded, and understanding what the limitations of the tool are and when it can be wrong and how it can be wrong and what I can feed into it and what's dangerous to use it for.
Right. So let's talk about Accenture LearnVantage. I think, I'll just state this, I think what your sweet spot is the understanding of the organizational shift, what should happen. So if I'm talking to superintendents in K-12 districts, which I do a lot, they need help not just understanding the technology, they need help understanding the transformation.
Sure.
Do you think you guys have a bead, at least superficially so far, on what that looks like? What's the end point? Where do we think AI is going to take everything?
So we have, I think if you could answer that question right, you wouldn't have to be working anymore. I think we knew with certainty.
Yeah.
But we do have a very close partnership with CMU, in addition to many of our ecosystem partners like NVIDIA and Amazon and Microsoft and Google.
Okay.
And we talk to these partners all the time about where we think the technology is headed and what the end state is going to be from a workforce employment perspective.
Yeah, I hope you're including Cisco in that because they have a good beat on it.
We do.
Okay, good.
And our thesis right now is that we're going to start seeing hyper-personalization of learning. And so right now, that's going to require people to step back and think about, we talk about AI in the workflow of education. Right now, a teacher comes in, they get a curriculum, and then it's up to them to figure out how to teach it. And I think in the future, that's going to have to be hyper-personalized, and the only way to do that is with AI. So understanding not just the persona that you're training for, but also the individual student and what makes them tick. And so being able to connect with them on a much more human level and help enable them to be able to learn things much more quickly than I think the one-size-fits-all solution goes at now.
Well, I think that the teacher role has to be refined, like you're saying. I also think that you don't get handed a curriculum anymore. You get handed standards.
Right.
You get handed like the code level of build your own job, right? And that's been a recipe for what, almost 8 years now of just complete disaggregation of what's happening in every subject across the whole market. Not as much in higher ed, right? Like it's a totally different ballgame. But in K-12, it's like everybody for themselves. Let's do a curriculum map, right? Like what? Right. It's crazy.
And I think that idea of that hyper-personalization driven by AI can be terrifying, I think, to a lot of teachers who say, it seems like this tool is taking away my job. You're trying to replace the human in the classroom with a machine, which is absolutely not the case. I mean, I used to be an instructor.
I would argue with that because there are examples like Alpha School where it's 100% AI and AI tutoring for all the core subjects.
I'm not saying that you can't do it. I'm saying it's not the right answer. I think.
No, I totally agree. I think you have to create human intersection.
That's right.
Yeah, but it has to be judged the correct point of intersection because the teacher's already overburdened.
Well, Julie Sweet, our CEO, has a great line that she uses. She says it's about human in the lead, not human in the loop. And so what we have to do is let the teachers understand that what they're doing is they're leading a group of agents that could be looked at as almost TAs, right? These are the people that are going to do the frontline work. But there's still such an important role for human mentorship and guidance that those students will need at those formative years, especially in K through 12. They were the teacher, like you said, is going to be able to free themselves from a lot of the minutia of grading papers or trying to go through all of these different manual steps and be able to actually focus on empowering those students to be the best version of themselves.
Which is going to be awesome. We could talk about that for another hour.
Which is amazing.
I have so much to say about that. I'm about to do another podcast on human intelligence. Well, this has been amazing. So thank you so much for being part of the focus and actually the push to bring change as a company and organization. Thank you, Tim.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone.